In the earlier videos, we saw the power of equity, the applaudable performance of equities. Now, let's understand the disclaimer, the risk in equity. When you narrate the power of equity to the investor, the wealth it has created, then it becomes equally important to familiarize the investor with the risks attached. Let's look at this table to understand the risk in equity. It shows the 39-year Sensex data from the year 1979 until 2018. And these columns indicate the returns generated by the Sensex over different investment horizons like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 15 years, 25 years up to 30 years. Beginning with the returns for a 1-year investment period. If an investor had invested in the Sensex on 31st March 1979 and withdrawn on 31st March 1980, he would have got a 28.57% return on his investment. Likewise, if he had invested on 31st March 1980 and withdrawn on 31st March 1981, then he would have got a return of about 35% on his investment. And so on until 2018. These 1-year investment periods have brought many pleasant surprises for the investors as well as shocks. If an investor had invested on 31st March 91 and withdrawn after a year, he would have got a return of almost 270% on his investment. But if he had invested a year later on 31st March 92 and withdrawn on 31st March 93, then 50% of his principal would have been wiped off during this year. Similarly, over these 39 different investment periods, sometimes the investors made stupendous gains. Like you see here, 45%, 62% return, 79% return, 49% return, 65%, 83%, 73% and so on. While there were also times when the investors lost a lot of money. Like you see here, in the investment period 2000 to 2001, the investor would have lost around 28% of his principal. Similarly, in the year 2008-9, the investor would have lost about 38% of his principal. Over these 39 investment periods, it is 13 times that the investors would have lost their money, resulting in a 33.33% probability of loss. So this analysis shows that an investor who would have invested in the Sensex for a 1-year period historically, there are a good 33% chances that he would have actually lost money. Now moving on to the 3-year investment period. As you can see, the number of reds have steeply fallen. Out of 37 different investment periods, 6 times the investor would have suffered loss on his investment, translating into a 16% probability of loss. And the maximum return generated has also come down to 82% from 267%. Similarly, over 5-year and 7-year periods, the maximum returns have also declined and the number of loss periods have also declined. The probability of loss over 5-year and 7-year periods have declined to around 9%. Now, as you move on to very long investment periods, like 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, etc., you will see the probability of loss has significantly declined and eventually become zero. If you look at the 10-year investment period, out of 30 different observations, it's just once that the investor lost money, translating into a just 3% probability of loss. And if you look at investment periods of 12 years or more, it's not even once in the history of Sensex that the investor has lost money. The probability of loss has become zero. So, this table shows that yes, equity is risky, but this risk is limited to shorter investment horizons only. Over long periods, there is only return in equity as the risk gets neutralized. We have another table to better understand the risk in equity. This table is nothing but a summary of the previous one. The first and the second rows show the maximum and the minimum returns generated by the Sensex over these different investment periods. As the investment period goes on increasing, the maximum returns generated by the Sensex goes on decreasing, while the minimum returns goes on increasing. Thus, the gap between the maximum and the minimum returns also keeps on decreasing. So this means that the volatility in returns gets neutralized over long investment periods. If you look at the shorter investment periods, the average returns are also high. But as the investment period goes on increasing, the average returns start stabilizing. Now moving on to negative returns. As also seen in the previous table, when the investment horizon is low, the number of times the investor made losses was high. And as the investment period goes on increasing, the number of times the investor made negative returns goes on decreasing. And eventually it becomes zero, thus indicating that the probability of loss is high in short investment periods. Over longer investment periods, the risk in equity gets alleviated. Let's summarize the risk in equity. The risk associated with equity is dependent upon the investment period. Longer the investment period, lower the risk. If your investor has a long investment horizon, then his risk level reduces significantly, as seen in the previous two graphs also. So that was about the risk in equity. Thank you.